Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Healing Art After Hours. I'm Shauna Robeson with Creating Space Coastal, and in this video, we are going to be creating an intuitive art journal page using the prompts of stories is our writing exercise. The focal point is book, the color is brown, the pattern is splatter, the medium is alcohol markers, tool and supply is stencil, and collage material is scrapbook paper. And this is the project that I created during this live tutorial. If you'd like to see how, please stay tuned. Let's get started. The topic of the day is stories, and how I want to think about stories is, we always have these thoughts that come at us whenever we experience a situation. How we interpret it is that we give it meaning through our own interpretation, our own filters, whatever we're experiencing. And we create a story around that experience. And oftentimes we create a story that isn't actually a true story, right? So we have to discern whether it's fact or fiction. And oftentimes the way we interpret the story, or the way we interpret the situation and the stories that we tell, can shift our perspective, can shift our mood, can really impact us in a lot of ways. So it's important for us to know that just because we think something doesn't make it truth. And we have this tendency as humans, we are wired this way. It's our narcissist side that wants to make whatever we think true, because we don't want to be wrong. We don't like to be wrong. So what we tend to do is, when we've come to a conclusion about something, a situation, for example, we start looking for evidence that will prove our interpretation of the situation. Right now, in that experience, I have these storytellers about these Zoom bombers, and in fact, I might write about those, about who they are and what their personality is and why they find the need to interrupt these kinds of things. I immediately have all these ideas, going through my head about these people, but I don't know anything about them really. I can only make up these stories, right? Without talking to them, without learning about their background, I can only fabricate a story. So I had this idea, a year or so ago, of the quote, I don't know if you remember the day. If you're younger, you won't. But back in the day when they had VHS tapes, they always had on there, "Be kind, rewind." And so that made me think about how we sometimes need to be kind and rewind our stories a little bit when we're dealing with people, because we need to be able to give the benefit of the doubt sometimes. Now, not in all cases. There are times when you need to take care of yourselves. And if you have an intuition that you're in danger, you need to act on that. So I'm not saying just trust everybody. That's not at all what I'm saying. You need to trust your intuition. But at the same time, there are times that you're not going to know the story. You're going to make up a story that's going to maybe cause you more anger or frustration. And then you're left with that anger and frustration. It's not harming them, hopefully. So let me give you an example so you can understand what I'm talking about. Road rage is a good example. Somebody cuts you off on the freeway, and there are lots of different thoughts that go through your head about that person. They're a jerk. I'm just going to say, probably initially a lot of you think, oh, that person's a jerk. They don't care about, anyone else on the road. They just care about themselves. But the reality might be that they're having a medical emergency, or maybe they have, a loved one that needs attention, or maybe you're just in their blind spot. We've all probably made the mistake on the road of shifting over when someone is in our blind spot. We make mistakes as humans, right? So how do you respond to that information? You could retaliate, and which could be dangerous for you and that other person. If the story is, if the story in your head pushes you to action, you may do something that could cause more harm than good. Even if you don't retaliate, if you're left angry and it changes your mood, and then you react to other people at work, you're letting that situation where you've made up the story of how insignificant this person thinks you are, let you be impacted by the story that you've created. So if we can change the story, if we really don't know the story, why not shift the story to maybe a positive story that's not about how insignificant you are, that, oh, they just made a mistake. You might be wrong, but if you're left with feeling at peace rather than being angry or wanting to retaliate, that's benefiting you regardless. It doesn't change anything for them. They're still a bad person if they are, and they're still not if they're not. But it impacts how you are and the stress that you have of the day and how you interact with other people the rest of the day. So just keep it in mind that we do tend to create stories that what we think isn't always true. And sometimes it's really important for us to rewind a little bit and think about the facts of the situation, what we really know, what we don't know, and use our wise mind to make a decision about how we move forward in the next steps, given that circumstance. Okay, so let's just take a moment to write about us. I'm going to probably write about the situation with these guys. And this is my emotion mind speaking. So I'm probably not going to give them a break if I'm saying what the story is that I'm thinking. But then my wise mind can come in and say, what are the facts of it? So write down a situation, and write down some stories and write down some facts. And however that makes sense to you. I'm just going to set a timer for 3 minutes to give us a chance to write. Now you can write this right on your journal project, right on the page, and then you can collage over it or do your art over it, or you can write on a separate page, or you can in another journal, however you want to do that. Just get ready to write in just a second here. I'm just going to set a timer for 3 minutes. This is just stream of consciousness, what comes to mind. Okay, let's get started. It's okay if you didn't finish your thoughts. You can keep going if you want to. You can also take this topic to, a deeper thought process if you want to in a journal. But we're just kind of getting our thoughts going here to help us with our intuitive process. So let me go over some of the prompts and what I gathered. And when I gather my prompt materials, I get ideas and I just grab the things that make sense. But I try not to spend too much time formulating what I have a plan to do, because that's not part of the intuitive process. The intuitive process is letting the process kind of guide you as you go along. And so I don't want to get too ahead of myself in what I'm planning to do. But I start to get ideas and the creative juices start to flow. So that makes me think of other things to grab. And so I just grab things that come to mind as I'm going along, and then we'll see how I use them in the end. Writing was stories. And so I thought for our subject today, book would make sense. And I was trying to think of different ways to get book, in it. I thought about making a little mini book. Came to mind. I did find this book in one of my old vintage magazines. So I pulled that, and I didn't really have any stamps that were books or anything like that. So, or any paper that had books on it or anything like that. So one thought I had was to maybe make a shape of a book as an area that I could journal in, or I could put a quote. Maybe I could put "Be kind, rewind" or something like that. So I don't know if I'll use this, but I have that. The other idea I had was, if I did make a little book, I could use these old cards. I'm not even sure what they're for, if they're kind of supposed to be a math card. I don't know. It's a 1 and a 4, but I thought about folding that in half and making like a little tiny book. So that's a possibility. And as far as book goes, I think those were the primary things that came to mind. So, and I brought some other papers and stuff that I could use to make a little mini book. The color was brown, and I could either use brown as one of the colors, but I thought it would be fun to just use brown and do monochromatic. And if I do kind of a vintage look, that works really well. So I just grabbed some of my inks that are in the brown tones, spray inks. that were in the brown tones as well. And my coffee spray. So these are all just brown tones, except for this is black, but my kind of my earth tone. So I grabbed just a bunch of pigmented things that in the brown tones, including this little dauber. But this dauber I actually brought because of another reason, and I'll explain that in a second. Because the next thing on the list is the pattern, and the pattern is Splatter, and this makes a really great splatter when you pop it down. So I thought I'm gonna maybe use that, and it's brown. It's Cup of Joe, so it's ink, but it's the color of coffee, so that could be fun. And then I also found, and this combines prompts as well, because I need to use a stencil, and here's a Splatter stencil, so that's fun. I have, oh yeah, and I have this stamp that's a splatter as well. So lots of fun splatter. And I even made some tissue paper with coffee that kind of has splatter on it. So I included that. So I found lots of things for that. Alcohol markers. Now I can use Sharpies are an alcohol-based marker, so you can use Sharpies if that's what you have. I have the Bic Markets, and I grabbed my earth tones in that. And then I also have, these are kind of a dollar store. These are actually from Daiso. And they're like, there was like $1.50 for 2 alcohol markers. So I could use some of those as well. The tool supply was Stencil. And so I showed you the splash one that I just now put in the splatter, not the splash, the splatter. I thought this is kind of like, you know, text like for books. And I also had some rubber stamps that I guess are just text like for books. So that's, I guess, another book thing. And this is just vintage. And I was thinking maybe vintage. So I pulled that. And then I found these stickers. This is actually a little vellum envelope and a little postcard. I thought this was a book at first, but it's not. So I don't know if I'll use those, but they were kind of cute. And then the collage material was scrapbook paper or designer paper. So I just went into my designer stash and found things that had browns. This one is one I made myself, but I have all these ones that were pre-made. So I could use any of those. We'll see how the creative process unfolds and go from there. And this was cool. I don't know if this is where I want to use this, but this was something I found. And since I do use coffee in some of my, for pigment, I thought that was really fun. Like I said, I don't think I'll use it here necessarily, but it was brown and it had coffee. So I thought that could be fun. So the first thing that I have to think about is, do I want to have any kind of collage layer? And I think I do, because I want to cover this text. This is just a processing text. I don't necessarily want to read this again. It's more just getting it out. So I think I do want to actually do some collage, especially since I need to use some of these papers. And I might start with some of this fun tissue. I like to start with tissue often. Oh, there are a couple things in my bin that I didn't show. I just now saw. So I have a couple more stencils here to choose from. This kind of reminded me of burlap, which is brown. And I don't know, I just liked this pattern. It's hard to see. This little diamond pattern, thought was interesting when I was looking through stuff. So sure, why not? And then I don't know if I'll use this, but this is actually just some vinyl shelf liner. And it's brown. So I'm like, okay, sure, why not? So this one's actually kind of like I don't know if it's cork or some kind of wood, but this would be also really a neat, like if I was going to do a little book to do like, I could make that into a little book. I don't know, I kind of like that idea. I don't know. I haven't decided yet. We'll see. All right. So these are postcards, and those often tell stories of travels and things like that. This is kind of an interesting pattern as well. So I'm just going to tear up some of these to make a collage background. See how that goes. Now, I don't think copy is very archival, but for my art journals, I'm not too worried about that because this isn't something I'm planning to sell. So if you are concerned about it, I would say maybe think twice or learn more about coffee, the archivalness of coffee, because I feel like it's acidic. Now I should probably, I didn't do this, but I do recommend having some kind of protective paper. Now you can see that the ink that I used is, it's actually an India ink, but it stays activatable for some reason. I always thought India ink would be permanent, but I kind of like, I don't mind it. Just adds to the interest. This is just the background layer. Okay, I'm going to take the balcony because sometimes we have to be the observer, from the balcony of our lives and take the emotion out of it, to really get to the facts of things. So that might be kind of fun to include in there. It may not end up showing up in the end, but that you have to not worry about what's going to show up and what's not in the end. And then you won't be so concerned about trying to hold on to certain elements when you're doing collage and layering and mixed media. You just put it in and then you see what happens. So along the edges, I'm just going to put some texture. And for that, I'm going to use, this is my super heavy. This is actually not golden. This is a Liquitex that I put in this jar. I have a big jar and then I put it into smaller jars. But I use both. But this is a super heavy gesso, and gesso is just the primer for acrylics that has some tooth to it. So it's got some chalk mixed in, and this one's particularly thick, and I can use it as a texture paste. And I like it because I think it dries a little faster than the texture paste that I have. So I think that works a little bit better. Now, maybe I'll play a little bit with the coffee on this glimmer sprays. So, but I can drop this pigment in. And this has a little shimmer to it. And then maybe I'll spritz a little bit of coffee. Okay, so I gotta start thinking about my book. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint out the shape of a book, imagining a book kind of opened up. And this is that gesso. Again, it's real thick, so I'm going to just water it down a little bit. So I'm just mixing it off camera with a little bit of water just to make it a little bit more like, paintable. You can mix acrylics up to about 25% with water without damaging the adhesive properties of it. Now this is just craft paint. It's really cheap. It's really thin, but perfectly fine for art journal. I try to not use my artist grade paints in my art journal. If I have like the color in a cheaper paint just because it doesn't have to be as archival for me and it saves money. Now I'm just gonna, I don't know how this is gonna go, but I still want more. I want more of a center. So I'm gonna try my Bic markets, and those are alcohol based. They're like a Sharpie. So let's just see if I can create kind of a shadow. See how it creates kind of that shadow look? I think I'm gonna do Once Upon a Time. Back in the day, this was how it was done. Of course, they were better at penmanship. This is just a place you can experiment ideas, you know, see how things work, and then they might work, they might not work. Then you know before you try it out on something that's a little bit more critical, like something you're making for someone. And then I want some splatter. Do a little white splatter. And again, I did some diluted white, sort of DIY acrylic ink. We did the writing on stories. We did the focal subject book, the prompt, the color brown. I certainly use that. Pattern splatter, medium alcohol markers I used for the book design, and the stencils I used a couple different ways, and the scrapbook paper. So I was able to use all the prompts today in this intuitive project, and there you go. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Healing Art After Hours. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, comment if you find my content helpful. And as always, happy creating. Bye.